Welcome to this video. It's Christmas time again, and recently we released our 24th course, the course about web components and stencil, just in case you're interested. Now 24 and Christmas, well, there was something, right? Because I thought, why don't we take the chance and build a little calendar together? Something like this right here. So this is the calendar, and if I click onto it, we can see that the doors are created dynamically in JavaScript. And if I click onto one of these doors, then as you can see it right here, one of the logos of our courses is opening right here. So that's what I would like to build in this video. We will do this by just using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. That's all we need. And with that, let's get started with this little Christmas project, you could say. We will get started with this code right here. This is basically an HTML boilerplate. I just added the link to the CSS file and here to our JavaScript file. And I changed the title to a calendar, calendar, whatever. And then I got empty JS and CSS files. And I got this folder right here. I called it courses. And there I have the logos for the 24 courses. Feel free to take any logo of your choice right here. And one calendar image, that will be the actual background image you saw, that image with that Santa Claus on it. But enough of the talking, let's get started now, because as I said, I would like to create the majority of the calendar dynamically in JavaScript, but we will need some HTML code to display the basics. The basics will basically be this part right here, so this button right here, and this calendar. And all this, so if I click onto this, and if we get the doors, and if we can click onto it to display the images, this will be rendered dynamically with JavaScript. However, we have to achieve this first, so let's go back to our code, and let's get started with the HTML file. For that, I will first add a button right here, and this button can be named Create Calendar, like that. And this button should also have a class to better interact with CSS later, so I will just call it button-start, like that. Let's see, so we should have a button right here, maybe a bit bigger, this one right there. Not beautiful, we'll work on that in a few seconds. The second thing we need is the actual div that contains the complete calendar, you could say. For that, I will add a div. No content needed right here, because the actual content will be added later. And the class could be something like container. Let's quickly format that right here. And with that, we are done with the HTML part of this video already. And before we go to the dynamic part in JavaScript, let's maybe add some basic styling already. So let's go to the CSS file, and let's first add this asterisk selector right here, which basically adds a specific rule to all elements on our page. By the way, I won't dive too deep into the CSS part right here. In case you are new to CSS or want to dive deeper, make sure to have a look at our CSS complete guide. However, back to this code right here. So we will use this asterisk, and I will just add box sizing border box right here. This simply means that if we talk about sizes, heights, and width and something like that, this will also include the border in the calculation when it comes to the width of or the height of the element. As I said, more about that in our complete guide. So let's now dive into the styling, and let's first style our button, which has the button start class right here. And I would like to have a background color for this button, maybe of our Academant orange. This is the FA923F hex code. I would like to have a color for the text on the button of white, like that. And I would also like to have a border around this button. This could be maybe 2 pixels, solid, and maybe the 521751, like that. And I would like to have these rounded edges for our button. For that, I will use the border radius property right here. And this could be something like, I don't know, maybe 15 pixels, anything like that. If I go back and reload the page, you can see that we have this rounded button right here with the orange background and all the styles that we used so far. I'm still not happy with the actual size of the button and with its positioning, because actually this button should be displayed in the center of the screen, so somewhere right here. For that, we can simply add margin. And now let's first define a top margin of maybe, I don't know, 15 pixels. And a left and right margin, that's the important one, of auto. With that, our element should be centered automatically, but in case of the button, we also have to add display block right here. If we do this, we will see that margin auto takes effect, and as you can see, now we centered our button easily. I'm still not happy with the size of the button, so let's maybe also add a width right here. You could now also stick to pixels, but as I would like to use some different units in this project, I will now maybe change to rem. So let's say we use 10 rem right here. By default, 10 rem would be equal to 160 pixels, by the way, but that's just a side note. And the height should be maybe 2 rem, something like that. If I now go back and reload the page, yeah, you can see our button looks a lot better now. With that, we are also done with the button. Now let's work on this container element that we just created. For that, I'll select the container class right here. And now let's start with the width and the height for the calendar to define a fixed area for this container. I don't want to create any responsive design right here. I just think the calendar should have a fixed height and width, and that's it. It's more about the actual content, so adding these doors and displaying the images right here. For that, I will add a width of, let's say, 800 pixels. As you can see, I'm now switching back to pixels. Here we use rem. I do this on purpose, as I said, so feel free to use any unit of your choice right here. And for the height, I might use something like 900 pixels because I would like to have this portrait style of the calendar. Additionally, I would like to have a border around my calendar, and I would like to have a thicker border, so let's maybe use 5 pixels, a solid border and a black one maybe, like that, because I would like to add a shadow later, so this black border with the black shadow, well, I think this could kind of look nice. And of course, I also want to center my calendar, so let's, oops, not margin bottom, let's use margin once again. This could be 15 pixels again, and auto for the second value right here. If we now go back and reload the page, and maybe zoom out a bit, once more maybe, we can see that we got our basic template for the calendar created already. What's missing now, of course, are two things. The first thing is the background image that we want to have right here. And the second thing are the doors. As I said, the doors will be created in JavaScript, but we have to add the basic structure for these doors right here in CSS already. We'll come back to the doors in a few seconds. Let's focus on to the background image first. And, well, as I said it already, for that we will use the background image property right here. And now we need to specify the URL of the image that should be displayed right here. Our image is located right here in the courses folder, and it's this calendar.png image. For that, we simply add /courses, like that, and now the calendar PNG file. Don't forget to add the PNG ending and the quotation marks at the beginning and at the end of our URL right here. With that, we should see our image. Let's see. Yeah, this is working. I'm not happy with the actual way our image is displayed right here. For that, I will simply add background size and set it to cover. If I do that and reload the page, you can see that our image now occupies the entire space available in our container, and it's also displayed correctly right here at the moment. Of course, I prepared this image, so feel free to use any kind of other image right here, and also to change the background size property according to your needs. However, with that, we got our basic structure right here. And if we switch back to our template, yeah, I think we are pretty close already. What's missing now, of course, are the doors. And as I said, if I click right here, I want these doors to be created dynamically with JavaScript. That's something we will focus on to in a few minutes, but as you can see, somehow JavaScript knows where these doors should be positioned. And we will kind of define this positioning template and the size and the width of each door already in CSS. And for this purpose, I will use a special CSS feature, the Css Grid. Now, let's dive into that now, and for that, let's go back to our code right here. And first, we need to turn our container. By the way, we are missing a curly brace right here, like that. Now it's working. So for that, we first have to add display grid right here. This will turn our container into a grid structure, you could say. And as mentioned in the beginning of this video, I don't want to dive too deep into CSS, but So in case the grid is totally new, make sure to have a look at the course I mentioned previously. But generally with the grid, we can basically build templates regarding a specific row and column structure. So we could build a grid, as the name actually says. Now what this means for us is we can simply define a fixed amount of rows and columns and also specify the height and the width of each column and each row. And well, the combination of rows and column and specific heights, well, this will basically build our grid structure that we need for the different doors in our calendar. Now this sounds kind of abstract, so let's simply get started now. And for that, I will first define our columns. So I will just use grid template columns right here. And now with repeat right here, we can now specify the amount of columns that we would like to have in our grid container right here and the width of each column. As we have 24 doors and a portrait style calendar, I would say that 4 columns and 6 rows, so 6 times 4, 24, this works, might be a good solution right here. So we need 4 columns, which we can enter right here. Now we have to add a comma, and now we have to specify the width each column should have. We will use a pretty straightforward approach right here. As we need an equal width for each column, we can simply say that each column should occupy 25% of the space available. Now, with that, we should have our columns defined. Now we can continue with our rows, and for the rows, we'll also use grid template right here, but this time for the rows. Now with repeat, we can again define how many rows we would like to have in our calendar. Well, in our case, this will be 6. But now I don't want to use any percentages or something like that. I will use the FR unit right here. FR stands for fraction, and it simply allows us to, well, tell our code that we want to give a certain amount of the space available to our row. Now, this sounds kind of complicated. If you think about it from our 6 rows perspective, then if I would add 1 FR here, then this would mean that each row gets 1 unit of the space available. Now in this case, this would mean that each row has the same height basically. If you would assume that you have 2 rows here and you would give the first row 1 FR, 1 fraction, and the second row 2 FRs, so 2 fractions, then the first row would have 1/3 of the available space, the second row would have 2/3 of the available space. Now, in our case, we have 6 rows which should occupy the same space, therefore we can use 1 FR right here. Now, let's see. If we go back to our page and reload it, you can't see any change. But if you now select the inspect tool and hover over the calendar, you can see that the grid right here is already shown by our dev tools. We didn't add any borders yet to our grid, but that's just a default feature that we have right here. And as you can see, we have 4 columns, each column occupying 25% of the available space right here. And we have 6 rows, each row containing 1 fraction of the available space. So we basically have 6 rows with an equal height for each single row. So this basically works fine. We now have the structure for our doors. At least we made sure that our CSS code somehow understands that we would like to have these different doors right here. But the problem is that we cannot access a specific door now, because each door now is kind of existing. But I would like to be able to give each door a name. So this would be door 1, door 2, door 3, and so on. So we need an option to be able to name these doors, at least internally. And then I would like to use JavaScript later to make sure that I can add the image with the number 1 to door 1, the image with the number 2 to door 2, and so on. This should happen dynamically, but for that, we first have to make sure that we can identify the doors, you could say. For that, we'll also use our grid template right here. Now let's go back to the code. And let's add the semicolon right here. And now I would like to use grid template areas right here, this property. This simply allows me now to recreate the structure we built so far, so the 4 column and 6 rows grid, and then name each part of the grid individually. So we have 24 different parts in our grid, you could say. And each part, so the doors in our case, can be accessed individually then by giving them a unique name, you could say. Now for that, let's start right here and let's add the quotation marks. And let's now add door, 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 and door right here. Now why door? Well, because these are basically the 4 columns we have, and each column has a door. So what I basically see right here are these 4 doors, so this first row. Now, if we take this code and go to the next row and paste it, then we build a structure for the second row in our grid. Now for the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth, all the same. Now the problem still is that we now named each door the same way internally in our grid. That's okay, we could do that. But if we now add a specific number to each door, well, then we basically have an option to kind of access each door individually. So what I will do now is I will simply add the numbers from 1 to 24 to each door name. So this could be door 1, door 2, door 3, and so on. I will quickly fast forward because I don't think that's really exciting here. So now with the grid template areas being finished, we are almost ready to dive into the JavaScript part now, because we have this grid structure and we can now basically identify the different doors, but we also have to add content to each of these doors, because at the moment we just see the grid structure because of the dev tools, but actually the doors are not existing yet. Now, as I said, I will use JavaScript later to create the doors dynamically, but now I would like to create such a door element in HTML quickly to see how it works, to style it quickly, and then to jump on to JavaScript. So for that, we go to the index.html file, and now inside our container, I will simply add one div right here. This div will have a class of image because it will contain the actual course image in the end. No content though. And inside this div, I would like to add another div, this time with the class text. I will come back to that in a few seconds. And the text will be, the text will be 1. Now, what did I create right here? Well, as I said, we have our calendar, and inside our calendar, we have a specific door. Each door will be represented by such a div in the end. And this door has a background image. But on top of this background image, we actually have nested inside of it the actual, well, door, you could say, the cover of the door, where I would like to add the number of the day. So in the end, we will dynamically create numbers from 1 to 24 in JavaScript later. If I go back now and reload the page, you can see the first element right here. So we have our div image in the top left part of our grid right here. It was added there automatically, by the way. So let's now style these elements, and let's also have a look at this grid logic before we can then continue with the JavaScript part. For that, in the CSS file, we have to add the selector first. So let's add this .image selector right here. So for the image, we first need a background. Image here, of course. We used that property before, so if we enter URL now, we can specify our URL, which could be courses, or would be courses / maybe course1, so this file right here. Let's see if we reload the page. Yeah, we can see that we basically added the image, but not perfectly. So let's work on the styling. First, we need background size cover. We used that before for our calendar image, so let's reload. Yeah, looks better, but for this image, as I said, I prepared this one, so we didn't need this value right here or this property right here. Here we need it. So we also need to center the image. For that, we use background position. This should be center. If we do so and reload the page, you can see that we have our ES6 logo displayed right here. So before we continue with the text on the image, so this one right here, for example, let me quickly show you how we can now use the grid template to kind of define the position of each image. For that, we can simply add grid area down here, and now we can simply specify one of the names that we added right here to our grid template area. For example, let's say that we want to display the current image at the position of door 5, then we simply add door 5 right here. If I now go back and reload the page, you can see that the image is displayed now down here at this position. And if we inspect that, we can see that this is basically the 4th row and the 3rd column. And if we go to the 4th row and the 3rd column, then we are exactly at door 5 right here. That's just a quick demonstration. We don't need that feature right now, but I just wanted to show you how we can use this feature later in JavaScript to, as I said, define the position of the different images. Now let's get rid of that, and let's now work on the formatting of the text on our door. For that, I will refer to the text class we just created. And we'll first basically define the height of 100% and the width of 100% right here. This wasn't required for the background image, but in case of the text, we can do this. Then I would like to change the color of the text. This should be white maybe. Let's see, this should look better already. Yeah. Then I think we can add some padding. Like this. I think it could be something like 10 pixels. So switching back to pixels again. And also a border. Maybe 1 pixel, solid, and also black, because the border of our calendar up here is also black. So this might make sense. Let's see. Yeah, I think it looks better. Now we have this number a bit more positioned a bit better. And we have this really slight border, almost invisible here. But I think it's better to have, or maybe let's add a 2 pixel border then to make it better visible. Yeah, I think now you could see it. So we have added this border right here to our image. This looks nicer, I think. And with that, I think we finished our HTML and CSS part, at least majority of it. So what we can do now is we can actually delete this div or these divs right here, because we will now create these dynamically in JavaScript. So let's reload the page. So this should be clean again. And well, yeah, let's now simply recreate that structure and make sure to create these 2 divs dynamically. For that, in JavaScript, we first need to define 2 variables. I need 2 constants right here. The first one is the calendar button. Let's call it like this, which should be equal to document query selector, like that. And it should select the button start class, so the button we created, because I would like to be able to click this button to create the calendar doors. And talking about calendar doors, I would like to be able to also access the calendar, because the doors are located on the calendar, so we need calendar access. For that, I will add another variable right here. So this should be a calendar, or maybe container, which should be equal to query selector. This was, I think, the container class right here. So with these, we should now have access to the button and the calendar itself, which is nice. And then we need another constant, which should be the amount of calendar days, because I would like to be able to loop through the different days on the calendar, and well, the amount of days in total should be 24. So we got these constants now. Now the next step is to make sure that if we click onto the Create Calendar button, that all images are created at once. For that, we need a function and we need a for loop, basically, because I would like to say that if I click onto the button, our code should loop through the different days we have, so 1 to 24. And for each day, it should create 2 elements, the image and the text element, where the position of the image element should be defined according to our grid template area. So we need to create an element which has the grid area value of $1. Then I would like to add this element at this position. And after that, I would like to add the second div, which contains our text, so the day of the calendar day, so the day actually, so 1 to 24, which should be added on top of this div. So we have to nest the text div inside the image div, as we did it before when we hard-coded it in the HTML file. Now, let's simply write the code to better understand this. For that, I need another constant right here, which could be create calendar, like that. Don't need any arguments here. And now we need a for loop. So what loop do we need? Well, for I equal to 0, our starting point, I is smaller than what? Well, our calendar days right here, because we want to loop until we reach a maximum amount of 24 days. So it should be smaller than the calendar days and should be incremented by 1 after each iteration. Then I would like to make sure that we create 2 things. We first create the constant, let's maybe name it calendar door, so the actual door that contains the image, which should be equal to document create element, because That's what we want to do here. We want to create an element. And what kind of element? Well, it should be a simple div. You remember, that's the div that should be created, which has the class image on it. We'll add the class in a few seconds. In addition to the calendar door, we need another element. Let's give it also a variable name right here. So calendar door text, so 1 to 24, which should be equal to document create element and also a div right here. Now, as I said, let's first work on the actual calendar door itself. I mentioned it already. We have to add a class to this element. So calendar door should get a class. So we use the class list property right here. And we want to add this class, and the class name should be image. As I mentioned, this is exactly the same logic that we had before when we created that element manually. Now with that, we have the element and we have the class. Now we need to make sure that this element is positioned correctly. So door 1 to door 25 in our grid template. What does this mean? Well, as you saw, we need to use the grid area property right here and define a specific name of our template, so one of these names right here, as the value for this property of the corresponding element. For that, we simply access the style property of this element and specifically the grid area property right here. And the value for this property should be equal to door. Yeah, but door is not totally correct, right? Because door is not a value we are using so far, because it should be door 1 to door 25. Well, but now we can make use of our for loop right here, because we start with I equal to 0, and we start as soon as I is smaller than 24. So we have I equal to 0 until I equal to 23. So if we simply say that that the grid area value should contain door plus brackets I 0 to 23, no, I plus 1, 1 to 24, then we would exactly give the grid area property of this element the name door 1 to door 24 for each loop that we go through. So with that, we made sure that the element is positioned correctly according to our grid area. And now we simply make sure that the element is also added to our DOM. Well, for that, we can simply refer to our calendar container, so the constant right here. We simply want to append our child right here, and the child, of course, is our calendar door element that we just created. So with that, we got our first part of the function finished already. Let's now see if this works by simply executing the function right here. So we say our calendar button should get an event listener. So this button right here, so the button that we created, should get an event listener. We want to listen to a click event, and once this click event occurs, we want to point to the create calendar function that we just created. So if we go back and reload the page and click right here, yeah, it seems to work. We always have the same image. That's just simply due to the fact that we still have our background image right here set to course 1. So if I would change it to course 2 right here, all images should change if we click. Yeah, this is working correctly. And if I look through our numbers, we can see that we finish with the 24th door down here. So this is basically working correctly. The problem now still is that we always have the same image displayed and that we don't have the actual, well, content on the calendar door, so the numbers. Let's maybe first set display image right here to none for now, because we need to create or add the image dynamically. So if we now reload once again, create the calendar, you can see that the elements were created, but we don't have any content now. That's fine. And let's also work on the, well, text on top of each door. Let's maybe start with the text first. So let's go back to our JavaScript code and let's add this down here maybe. Because now we need to access our calendar door text variable, this one right here, because we want to make sure that each time our for loop is executed, we want to access calendar door text. Whoops. And actually, it's the same logic that we had right here. We want to add the class of text this time, right? Because that's the class that we defined in our CSS code. The position doesn't have to be added right here because we are already defined that right here for the image, and we will append this text element to the corresponding door element, you could say. With the door element being positioned correctly, with the image element, you could say, the text will also be positioned at the right position. What we have to add here, though, is some text on this element. And this should be the numbers from 1 to 24. So we simply enter calendar door text. Now, inner HTML, and this should be equal to I plus 1. Right? Same logic that we saw before. We simply want to make sure that the numbers of 1 to 24 are added right here. Now we simply want to append the child, but this time we won't append the child to the container, but to the door right here. So we have to add calendar door, append child, and now what should be appended? Well, our calendar door text, this one right here. With that, if we reload the page and create the calendar, and yes, I think this looks kind of okay now. We can see that we created our doors for the calendar, and we don't have any background image set. That's why we changed it to none right here. So this looks fine. So we basically see the image for the entire calendar now. And we created all the different fields dynamically in JavaScript. So this works also fine now. So this means we only have to add one last feature, because now we also want to be able to click onto one of these doors and to make sure that once we click onto these doors, one specific course image is displayed. For that, I first want to make our course path a bit more dynamic, because actually we only need to change one thing in our URL. And this one thing is, that's why I prepared it like this, by the way, is simply the number. And for the courses, we also have numbers from 1 to 24. So what could we use right here? Of course, our I, so basically our variable that's increasing each time our for loop is executed. For that, we go back to our JS file right here and first make this path a bit more dynamic. So we could, for example, say that the course number is equal to I plus 1, right? So 1 to 24 once again, same logic. And that the course path right here should be, well, it's still /courses/ well, let's say course1 JPEG, but that's not really correct because we actually need this number right here to be a bit more dynamic. So this should actually be our course number right here. And for that, we can simply use template strings right here. So let's first add a $sign right here and now replace 1 with curly braces and the variable name, so course number. And now we simply replace our normal single quotation marks with these backticks right here at the beginning and maybe like that then. Let's do it like this. So at the beginning and at the end. This is called template strings, an ES6 feature. I don't want to dive too deep into that now. The important thing is now that we were simply able to add this variable right here to our string. And with that, we now created a more dynamic course path, because this simply means now that each time we run that for loop, the course path simply change, specifically the image selected changes. And that's actually what we want right here. Now we need to add the logic that allows us to react onto a click onto a door and then execute a specific function, which we also have to create, because the function should then simply add the image with a specific number as the background image. For that, let's first add the event listener, and this listener should be on our calendar door text right here. So add event listener, and the event is a click event once again. Right here. And once this event occurs, we want to execute a specific function, or we want to point to a specific function to be a bit more precise right here. Let's create this function maybe separately, and let's maybe call it open door right here. So we created that pointer. And now let's first create that function before we dive deeper into the syntax here. So let's create it right here. Constant open door. This function will accept the default event, so we can add this right here. Now, what should this function do? Whenever we click onto our calendar door text right here, so onto the, well, door of the calendar basically, then the background image property of, and that's important, the calendar door, so not the calendar door text, but the calendar door, should change, because we want to make sure that the value changes from none to the URL that we just use for the corresponding iteration of our for loop. So for example, we want to load the first image for the first iteration. For that, we can simply use our default event that we get back right here, and we can now access our target. Now, the target in our case is not calendar door, but the calendar door text, so the element which stores the actual number of the calendar. Now, in our case, as we just talked about, this is not the element we want to interact with at this stage. We want to interact with the calendar door element, so the element that contains the background image property. Therefore, we will use event target parent node in that case, because the parent node of our calendar door text is, well, calendar door, and therefore exactly the element that we want to interact with. And of this parent node, we want to target the style.background image property right here. And this background image property should be changed to, well, we did that before, the URL, but this time this URL should be equal to our course path down here. And now we kind of have a problem, because the course path is defined right here inside our function. And now we have to kind of get the information that we have stored in here into this function up there. How can we do this? Well, the answer is we can simply change our code down there. If we use bind right here, like that, then we can simply use this bind method here to kind of pass the information in here to our function created up there. For that, we have to make sure that we follow the correct syntax. The first argument of our bind method would be this right here. We don't use this, so this could also be equal to null right here. And now important, the second argument right here is our course path, because that's exactly what we want to pass to our other function. This course path here should be available up here in our function we are just creating. Now, with that connection being in place, we have to make sure that we also add the argument up here in our open door function. The default event we get back must be the last argument right here in a potential rows of arguments. So we leave it right here and add the path argument as the first one. Now we can use this path, so we basically connected this course path right here with our function, you could say. So we pass the information right here. And now we can simply use our syntax we had before. So we add the curly braces, add path right here, and replace our single quotation marks with our backticks. We did that before already. And as you can see, with our bind method down here, we are able to pass the information right here to our new function, and then also to use the path for our image right here to make sure that the background image changes according to the current image that should be selected based on the, well, iteration we are going through in our for loop. Now let's see if this actually works. So let's go back and reload the page and click on to create calendar. This is working, we know that. And if I now click on to 16, we can see the progressive web app logo. If I click on to 10, we can see the React Native logo. Doesn't look too bad actually. Let's have a look at our images. So we selected 10, this is React Native. And we selected 16, this is progressive web apps. So with that, this logic is actually working correctly. We can now simply click on any kind of image in our calendar and make sure that the corresponding course image is displayed. That's quite cool actually, as I would say. There is only one last thing that I don't like right here. So if I reload the page and create the calendar once again and hit 2, for example, then the image is displayed immediately. So we are kind of missing any kind of transition right here to make this a bit smoother. Additionally, we can still see that even after we opened our calendar, the day is still visible. Also not something really realistic, so let's also change that. And I would like to solve this as follows. Regarding the number right here, I would simply like to change the opacity, because at the moment the number is visible, so the opacity is equal to 1. But if I would change the opacity to 0, then the number would disappear. Let's do this first maybe. For that, we go back to our JavaScript file and right here into our open door function. Right here we can now again access our element, now the target element, so now the element that is basically clicked, so the open door text element. And there I simply would like to change the opacity right here, opacity, and I would like to change it to 0. Like that. If we do this and reload the page, let's see. Yeah, it disappears. It disappears immediately though, so we also have to add a little transition right here. For that, I'll go to the style CSS file and now simply add transition. Right here, I want to access the opacity property, which should have a kind of transition time. So the change from opacity 1, which is the default value, to opacity 0 should take a while. And let's maybe say this should be, let's say 2.5 seconds. If I do that, let's see, let's click. Yeah. And as you can see, now the number is fading out smoother. This looks cool. I also would like to add another thing. Once I click the image, I want to add a background image to our text door right here, so to the element that includes the number. And this should pop in immediately and then fade out also 2.5 seconds. So the same duration we have for the opacity, because with that, we get that fade in effect for our background image. Therefore, we again go to the main JavaScript file right here. And now say that event target style background color should be equal to, let's say, again, 521751 right here. You know that already. And if I now go back to our calendar, because we don't need to add any transition right here, because the opacity of the entire element is affected right here. Therefore, the element kind of disappears, you could say. So if I now reload the page and click on to create calendar, yeah, you can see that we have this nice effect right here. Actually, I thought we could also use the orange, but I think we should stick to that purple. I think this looks nice. One last thing I would like to add though is a little box shadow around our calendar. For that, we go back to our style CSS file right here to the calendar and simply enter box shadow. Now we have to specify the x-axis value, so how far we go from the position of the element to the right. So let's say this could be, I don't know, maybe 6 pixels. Same thing for the y-axis value. And we also need some blur, so maybe 20 pixels, and maybe some grayish color. I don't know. Let's see if I go back now and reload. Yeah, I think now this looks cool. So with that, we finished our calendar. As you can see, we did this all with the core basic tools of web development, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And with that, I hope that you liked the project, that you maybe learned even something, and yeah, that you also like the Academy calendar, And yeah, as always, after such videos, I can only say thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you in one of the next videos or one of the many other videos that you can find right here on our YouTube channel or on academy.com. So have a nice day. Bye.